Hi, I'm Daniel Fisher here at Sweetwater Sound, and today we're going to give you some tips for using reverb with synthesizers. So we really are living in a golden age of using pedals with synthesizers, and that's for two reasons. One, because the pedals are now stereo in, stereo out, and two, because they're getting much better at handling the line level that typically comes out of synthesizers. So first, let's define the difference between reverb and delay. And there can be some confusion because pedals are getting pretty good at doing both or mimicking each other. But reverb and delay are probably the oldest effects on the planet Earth. They go back as far as you have cliff walls and mountains and caves. We've had delay and reverb. And so, without using any math or graphs, without getting too tweaky, I just want to kind of overgeneralize on the difference. And so the first is delay. And the way you would get a good example of a delay in real life is, like when I was a kid, we had this school building that was basically the shape of a big brick, and it was in the middle of a parking lot, so there were no other buildings near it. And when you were in the playground, if you yelled at the wall of the building, you would get an echo straight back at you. That's delay. And the crucial thing is that if I yelled a sentence, the sentence would come back at me. And the reason there is a delay is that because sound is relatively slow compared to light, and so it takes a while for the sound to come out of my mouth, hit the wall, and come back at me at the speed of sound. Kind of like this. Hey, what? Oh. So reverb, on the other hand, is not a single delay. It's many, 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 many delays. So, for example, if you're in a cathedral or a cave and I shout, sure, I'm going to hit the back wall, it's going to come back to me. But it's also going to hit the floor, then the back wall, then the ceiling and come back to me. And it's going to go off to this side and then hit that wall and then this wall and come back to me. And it's also going to the floor there, then there, then there, then there, then there. In fact, there are literally an infinite number of bounce paths that my sound is taking. And the key thing is that every one of those paths has a different length to get back to me. And a different length means a different delay time. So what makes reverb is that it's an infinite number of different delay times all at once. And the end result is, unlike my echo, where if I say 1, 2, 3, you're going to hear 1, 2, 3 back. When I shout into a cathedral or a cave, you're going to hear all of the sounds of each and every one of those numbers I said, but they're all going to be occurring at the same time in a blurry soup. And that's reverb. And so it's crucial to decide when you want to use reverb or delay. Do I want an exact repeat in order of what I played, or do I just want a sound cloud of all the frequencies that I've been using? And that's kind of the key difference between the two. So I have 4 pedals with me. These are currently popular pedals. They all do great reverb. They are all stereo in, stereo out if you want, or they can be mono in, mono out, or they can be mono in, stereo out. They're very flexible, and I really like that about these pedals. Also, like I said, they all do a really good job of taking line level in and not distorting. But anytime you're going into a guitar pedal and it starts distorting, on your keyboard, try pulling it down to about 75% on your volume slider. That's usually all I got to do to stop the distortion. Now, if you want to get fancy in a studio, you can use something to impedance match and everything else. But honestly, I've done so many projects where I just take 1/4 inch out to 1/4 inch in, make sure my volume is not greater than 75%, and I have no trouble at all. And for my sound sources, I'm going to be using 2 Reface keyboards from Yamaha. They're great. I own all 4 of them. There's just so many times in life when it's just really handy to have a battery-powered keyboard with true stereo speakers built in and a nice feeling keyboard. They're small keys, but they work really well for me. And it just makes it great to throw into a backpack and take. And so this was a perfect keyboard for these. And I'm not going to use any of the effects on either of these keyboards, but I will at first turn the delay on because I want you to just one time hear what I'm talking about. Notice how when I play notes in a certain order, the delay is going to play them back in that same very recognizable order. Okay, that's delay. Okay, so now I'm going to use the Ventris Dual Reverb by Source Audio. I really love this reverb. I use it a lot, in particular because of how flexible it is with many, many different engine types, as well as everything being able to be controlled by MIDI. There are 4 presets you can get to from the front panel, 128 presets you can get from MIDI, plus you can use expression pedal or control voltage to control whatever parameter you want. So exciting stuff there. And so I'm starting with a basic hall because that's just your most obvious reverb. And one more time dry. And I have a medium length hall reverb here. And you hear it die out, and I can shorten that reverb, and I can shorten it to the point where it's kind of not real. There are very few caves or cathedrals that'll have a big reverb that ends quickly, but here it is. And the benefits of that are that you can get the bigness of a huge reverb and yet not have those long tails making mush out of everything. So now I'm going to go long, and I really am going to mush this thing out. And it really is beautiful over time how it changes the timbre and the stereo perspective. Reverb's just a great thing, you know? So the next parameter we're going to talk about is pre-delay. And in real life, pre-delay is what tells you how far away you are from the nearest wall. Assuming, of course, you're blindfolded and can't see the walls, you would know how far you are from a wall because you would yell and the reverb wouldn't start until at least your first reflective surface gets your sound, throws it somewhere else, and it gets back to you. So if there's a long time before the reverb starts, your brain knows you're in a really big place and you're somewhere in the middle of it. So here it is with no pre-delay. I'm going to shorten it back to a medium length reverb. But the key thing is the minute you hear the electric piano, you're also hearing the reverb. Now I'm going to go to an extreme. I'm going to turn the pre-delay all the way up, and so you're not going to hear reverb for a while. And as I said, pre-delay does exist in a real life reverb because it's the time it takes to hit the first wall. But there are also musical and production implications of pre-delay, and that is by making the reverb not happen right away, it lets your sound sit in the mix a little farther forward. It lets the reverb not clobber on top of your important transients of the initial part of the sound. So you'll hear, as I go from no pre-delay to pre-delay, you'll hear that the piano starts getting farther and farther in front and a little more clear. So here's one. Some pre-delay. And a ridiculous amount of pre-delay. So you can really hear the original note first. And of course, it's probably more than you would normally use it. The next thing you can have that's really important is tone control over the reverb. So on the Ventris in the hall position, this control knob one does bass. So if I don't want my reverb to be muddy, which especially if you're using low pitched instruments, you don't want mud, so I can roll off the low end, and I'm going to go extreme. But you can hear the reverb is just splashy. And now I'm going to turn the bass all the way up. And you hear all that big grunge on the bottom, and that might be what you want, but in a production mix, you probably want to get some of that bass out of there if the instrument going into it has a lot of bass. Another consideration is the size of the room or the hall, and that affects the math that's doing all of these virtual echoes that are creating reverb. And so here it is with a small room. And now a much larger room. And that's different from time. Although it does affect the time, it definitely just makes your ears more aware that you're in a much bigger room because the math is doing delays at much longer times. Another really obvious parameter is mix, where I can go from completely dry to completely wet. So one of the considerations when you're looking at different reverb pedals is, do you want your mix to go from completely dry to completely wet, or do you want to go from completely dry to still fully dry with the reverb mixed up very high? And that's a very different sound. Me, because of all the atmospheric stuff I do, I like when I turn it all the way up to not hear the dry signal. So here's a mix where it's mostly dry with just some reverb way in the back. And now an even 50-50 split. And now completely wet, no dry signal at all. And the thing I really like about being able to go 100% wet is that it stops sounding like the source instrument. You can really create your own new ambiances, especially when you start messing with all the other controls that don't sound anything like the original. You might not even be able to guess what the original is. So another reverb engine available on the Ventris is True Spring. And so now they're modeling humans' attempt at recreating the sound of a cathedral by having long springs hanging, and you put the sound into one end and you listen to the sound at the other end, and it gives you a pretty decent reverb, and it sets a tone if you're trying to go for a surf vibe or certain other genres that really rely on that spring sound. But it's a little more boingy. It definitely has its own artifacts. We'll go up some higher octaves. And we can lengthen that. And we can also lengthen literally the length of the springs. And it's got a boingy, splashy sound that people just love. And there are so many on these, so just go to the Ventris dual reverb video to see all the rest of them. And the last one we'll try on this is Shimmer. And basically with Shimmer, what they're doing is they're taking the output of the reverb and running it through a pitch shifter. So you're hearing the reverb regularly, but then you're also hearing a little bit of that reverb going into a pitch shifter, usually up, but some lets you do down. If there's only one choice, it's usually going up one octave. And then that output is going into feedback and coming around again. So there's this constantly cascading octave pitch shift upwards that creates this angelic reverb, and it definitely makes whatever you're doing on your keyboards a lot more complex and certainly brighter and more interesting. So here's dry real quick, and with Shimmer. I just love playing with reverb. Sometimes with a really good reverb, you should think of your instrument as a way of playing the reverb, not playing the instrument. You're just plucking the reverb and letting it do its magic, and then you can control that in real time or via MIDI. So the next pedal is the Mercury 7 Reverb by Meris. And we just got these, so I'm certainly not an expert on it, but the labeling's very clear, and I thought it would be fun to include something this new in the video. So right off the bat, I can see that it has a dedicated knob for low frequency, a dedicated knob for high frequency, a knob for space decay, which is your decay time, a knob for your mix, which goes from very wet to very dry, and then a knob called Modulate, and that's going to add a subtle chorus to the reverb. And then there's one called Pitch Vector, and basically what that is Shimmer, except instead of just always only going up one octave, you can choose either to go down an octave or some various intervals like perfect fifth, and we'll dial through some of those. And so right now I have it set to Cathedral, which I'm guessing is a cathedral. And I have it set to just basic parameters. And so one more time, dry. And with the reverb turned on. And now I can show you what the modulate parameter does. And to be clear, that's on all 4 of these. I'm just kind of spreading the love around the 4 pedals. So here is some modulation with the reverb. And I'm a big fan of using modulation in your delays and in your reverbs. Maybe not both of you using both at the same time, but I love having modulation in at least one of those because it tends to be a very stereo modulation if you're using stereo. And 2, it's one less pedal. I don't have to take a chorus pedal with me if I don't want to, because modulated reverb and modulated delay is a pretty decent emulation of chorus. And to be honest, chorus is really just modulated delay, as is vibrato, as is flange. And so you can hear a little bit of the flanginess and the chorusness as I turn it up. And I'm going to make the delay a little longer than normal so you can really hear it. So once again, dry. And with engaged. And now I'm going to turn the modulation up. And you can go crazy. Those things, just a little bit goes a long way. You know, it's like spice. Just use a little bit of it, but you can really hear it wake up. I'll go no modulation again. And then just a little bit. And if you have headphones on, you're really going to be hearing this. Another thing that this offers is a version they're calling Ultra Plate. So far we've talked about Hall as a reverb, and in the old days, they used to really do reverb in a reverb room. In other words, they'd have a dedicated room with a speaker in it and a mic in it, and you would simply send a channel on your mixing board to the speaker in that room that would get picked up by the mic and bring it back in. So rooms and halls literally were rooms and halls at one point until somebody came up with a plate reverb. And a plate reverb is a big metal plate hanging vertically, and it has a transducer on one end of it, something that turns a signal into audio, and then another transducer up here that turns the audio back into signal. And so you put one on one end and one on the other end of this plate, and it wiggles the plate. The sound goes through the plate, it gets picked up by the other end, and now you have plate reverb, which uses a lot less room than a dedicated reverb room. And people found that plates are particularly good on vocals, and so it's one of the reasons it's always offered. And so I'm going to turn the modulation off. I'm going to just do a quick stab in Cathedral. And now a quick stab on plate, or they're calling it Ultra Plate. It's definitely a tighter sound, and like I said, it's been used for vocals for decades. So another thing I'll show on the Mercury 7 is the Swell Footswitch, and that is if I press it while some notes are in the reverb, it will swell that reverb up. Great at the end of a song or at the end of a passage where you want something to just really hang long until you want it to drop away and then you let go. Another interesting thing is if you press this Alt button, you get an automated swell. So now it's kind of like a slow gear pedal into a reverb. Again, all of these things are really musically useful and very musically pretty. And the last thing I'll show on this is its pitch vector, otherwise known as shimmering. But like I said, this has some variations. So here is just some verb, no modulation, but a nice long time. And now I'm going to turn the pitch vector an octave down. So now what we should hear is the reverb is constantly going down another octave as the reverb is regenerated and going through this pitch shifter. Now we'll go up a real high octave so it doesn't get muddy. And now we'll try it with a very long time. We'll add a little bit of modulation. Maybe roll off the high end a little bit, roll off the low end a little bit more. Now it should be really pretty. Definitely gives you ideas for new compositions. Great for soundtracks, obviously. So this next reverb pedal is the new Blackhole by Eventide. This literally got here as we were setting up. We didn't even know if it was going to get here in time. So I know the least about this one, but we'll plow through, right? The thing that makes the Eventide stuff so exciting is how well you can manipulate the parameters in real time and just get amazing stuff. Like someone said, it messes with the fabric of time. And man, this pedal does that very, very well. So the front panel knobs, we'll do dry first. All right, and if I turn it on and I set this to a pretty normal setting here, we'll get reverb. And like most of them, I have control over my low frequencies, so we'll play some low notes here. And then roll off the low. So you're hearing the splash of the low note, but you're not really hearing the bottom end. And now I'll go the other way. And then the same with highs. And so it's nice that those are always right there on the front panel. We've got feedback, which will just simply make this ring longer and longer. And like the others, it has the ability to control the size, so I can go from like absolutely artificially small area. It's real splashy and boingy to ridiculous. And it sounds really cool when I move the knob in real time after I get something in there. I love being able to play with stuff in real time. And then they have one called Gravity. And basically, man, the easiest way to do it is just show it to you. So I'm going to turn the Gravity positive. But now I'm going to turn the Gravity negative. So it's kind of a forward-backwards thing, but it definitely has more elements to it than just that. And there are secondary functions on the front panel. I just hit this little button here. And so now I have my pre-delay. Wow, that's one long pre-delay. So another one of the secondary parameters on the front panel is Q, or resonance. And basically it's going to make the filters that are doing the low and the high boost and cut, it's going to make them more peaky and you're going to hear them move around. So I turn the secondary button on. I'm going to turn the Q way up, ridiculously high. And now I'm going to sweep the low parameter. So you're really hearing me sweep through the different bass frequencies because that peak's moving through it. Now, same thing with the highs. And like most of the pedals, you have the ability to do modulation. So I'm going to change the depth and the rate of an LFO that's modulating the pitch of the delay. And go crazy with it. And then I also want to mention the freeze button, which basically gives you the ability to freeze a section of reverb. And you can play with it. Beautiful thing. And the last pedal we're going to do is the trusty RV6. This is from a long line of reverb pedals. And this particular version has stereo inputs, stereo outputs, the ability to use an expression pedal, and it has lots of different reverb choices from the single knob. The wet-dry mix does not go to fully wet on this one. This one always keeps your signal present. So if I turn it on, I can go from this. And the reason someone might like that is it never ever changes your original dry signal no matter how far you turn that knob. Any other knobs include tone, so you can have a really bright reverb or really dark reverb, somewhere in between. And then the time, which lets you have very, very short reverbs to very long reverbs. Other engine types include a delay, which is very cool because they're giving you both delay and reverb. And that sounds really good with arpeggiations. It's just a great way to have two effects in one pedal. Like the others, they have a shimmer. It also has a room setting. Definitely shorter, more concise. It has a plate. Nice and clear, concise. And then spring. We'll get in a lower note, see if we can't get it to spring a little bit. So you can hear that boinginess going on. And then one of my favorites on this, it does modulation. So you can hold a chord and just hear the beautiful lushness in stereo. So now I'll show you the modulation effect using the Reface CS based on the CS80. And this is going to do synthesizer timbres, which will be better because I'm feeding high frequency information into these. And I'll show you each of their modulation and shimmer types with this sound instead. So here is the RV6 set to modulate. Here's the dry. And with reverb, that's being modulated. When you turn it off, boy, you really miss it. Now, to be fair, I'm not using any of the modulation on this. I'm on purpose making this sound as plain and dry as possible. Then you turn that on. But to be clear, any modulation you do hear is going to just be even more gorgeous through this. So I'm going to add a little bit of texture and mod. without it. So clearly very musical. So now I'll show you its shimmer. Here's dry again. Clearly a very useful effect. Now let's try some of the shimmers on the other ones. So now here's shimmer on the Ventris, dry again. Shimmer on the Mercury. Dry. And here it is with the octave down. Here's some other variations. Now here's one with a perfect fifth. And so it's not just a perfect fifth, but it's stacking perfect fifths off of each of the perfect fifths. So you'll hear it go up the whole set of them. And now turning the knob further to get into shimmer. And just a reminder, dry. Okay. Now the next pedal, the Eventide Blackhole, doesn't have a dedicated shimmer parameter, but it does give you expression pedal control over whatever knob you want. And so if you modulate the size parameter, you can get some really fascinating things. So hopefully you got some good tips for using reverb with synthesizers. If you have any further question about any of the gear I used today, please call your Sweetwater sales engineer. My name is Daniel Fisher. Thank you very much for watching. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. For more videos like these, click here or go to sweetwater.com for all your music instrument and pro audio needs.